What's up guys, Ghost here, back with some more Battlefield 4 info. The system requirements for PC have recently been released, and if you've seen them, you're probably asking yourself, do I have to upgrade my PC, and if so, what do I have to upgrade, and how much money am I going to have to spend on it in order to play the game in ultra settings on, MSAA 4 times and all its glory. And that's what I'm going to try and help you guys out with today. So I'll put the system requirements up on the video just for anybody to sort of peruse at their own leisure, but I'm going to quickly run through them just for anybody who hasn't yet seen it. So for the minimum requirements, you'll need Windows Vista 32-bit, an AMD Athlon X2 2.8GB or an Intel Core 2 Duo 2.4GB. You will need 4 gigs of RAM. You will need an AMD Radeon HD 3870 or an NVIDIA GeForce 8800 GT. Each with 512 megs of vRAM, and then you'll also need 30 gigs of hard drive space. Moving on to recommended requirements now, and you'll need Windows 8 64-bit, AMD 6-core CPU or an Intel quad-core CPU, 8 gigs of memory, an AMD Radeon HD 7870 or an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 660 with 3 gigs of VRAM, and of course, once again, 30 gigs of free hard drive space. So there's definitely a couple of things on this list that come as a bit of a surprise to me, and the first is that they're recommending Windows 8 64-bit. I suppose that can only mean that they've in some way optimized the game to run a little bit better on Windows 8 than it does on Windows 7 or any other version of Windows. But personally, I'm going to stick with Windows 7. I don't think it's going to be that much of an increase in performance or sort of frame rate or anything like that. I just really don't like Windows 8 all that much. So even though they are recommending Windows 8, I think you'll be completely fine with Windows 7. And the other thing, and the biggest surprise, is that they're actually recommending 3 gigs of VRAM, which is a hell of a lot, and in my opinion, probably unnecessary. I mean, a GTX 780, which is an extremely expensive graphics card, has 3 gigs of VRAM. The 770 is a very, very good card, but even that only has 2 gigs, unless of course you go for the 4 gig version. But unless you're running, say, 3 monitors at the same time, or you're running a resolution that's higher than 1920 by 1080, you really don't need more than 2 gigs of VRAM. So if you have something like a 770 that's got 2 gigs of VRAM, I wouldn't, go freaking out about the fact that they're recommending 3 gigs. I think you'll be totally fine running in ultra settings. So having seen these recommendations, you're now probably thinking, well, I'm going to have to upgrade my graphics card. You may have to upgrade your processor as well, but in general, processors sort of get upgraded much less frequently than graphics cards, and RAM is pretty cheap to come by. So if there's something that you're going to have to upgrade for Battlefield 4, more often than not in most cases, it's going to be your graphics card. So just to sort of assist you guys with what you can expect from the graphics card you've got or what upgrade you should be getting, I'm going to show you some of the results from the benchmarks in the Battlefield 4 Alpha here. Now, while these charts do sort of show how the different graphics cards fared off against each other in the alpha test, this is not realistic of how these cards are going to be performing once the official game is released. I mean, even when the beta is released, the game still won't be properly optimized, and you can still expect to see a frame rate increase once the official game is released and they've had time to optimize things properly. On top of that, Nvidia are probably going to be releasing new drivers, as are AMD, for their graphics cards that will give a performance boost, and they'll be doing that with Battlefield 4 in mind. So just take these numbers with a pinch of salt, guys. Don't start looking at your card and be going like, oh my god, my card's only performing at 25 frames per second, I got to upgrade. This is just a little bit of an indication from what you can expect from your graphics card or any card that you may be looking to upgrade to. And as a perfect example of this, they actually recommended the GTX 660 for Battlefield 4, and you can see from this chart that it was only performing with an average frames per second of 28 and a minimum of 21. However, do bear in mind that these charts are all on ultra graphics with MSAA 4 times in 1920 by 1080p. And it's also done with the Intel Core i7 3970X, which is a beast of a processor running at 4.9 gigs. So I would estimate that from the sort of mid-section of these charts here, anything from the GTX 660 up to maybe the 770, all of that will probably be able to play Battlefield 4 on high settings at 60 FPS on release. Some of them towards the lower end, you may have to sort of turn it down to medium graphics settings, turn off any anti-aliasing and that kind of thing. But for me, I'm going to wait to buy a graphics card, and I'll tell you why. I was going to jump and get a GTX 780, and especially for me because I want to be providing the best graphics that I can for you guys since I make YouTube videos. And on top of that, I'm also going to be recording my footage, so not only do I need a rig that can play the game in sort of ultra settings and with all the sort of whistles and bells turned on, but I also need to be able to record that without getting too much of a frame rate drop. And I'll tell you why I'm not going to do that. Everybody recommended to me to wait. I mean, every forum I looked on, every sort of person who replied to me in a post, even the guy at the computer shop that I rang and I sort of asked him, hey, when are you getting some more 780s in? He even said I would wait because AMD are bringing out their new line of graphics cards this October, and nobody knows exactly what it's going to be. It sort of depends how much they bring to the table, how much they can push Nvidia off, because at the moment Nvidia have the GTX 780 and they have the Titan, and they're kind of dominating. But if AMD brings something that can rival the GTX 780 for a cheaper price, then that is going to drive the price of the 780 down. So whether you decide to get one of these new AMD cards, which I think are sort of codenamed Hawaii, or you decide to get the GTX 780, I would wait until October, because once the AMD cards come out, you may see a 20 to 30% price drop in the 780 because it is pretty expensive right now. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to sort of stick with my GTX 580, and I have a 3770K i7 processor overclocked at 4.5 gigs. So recording wise, I should be able to record in 60 FPS on at least high settings for you guys. So that's what I'm going to do for the beta. Once these AMD cards come out, I would then compare those to the high-end Nvidia stuff and sort of compare prices. Hopefully some of the Nvidia prices will then go down and I would get a graphics card then. It would be pretty silly to waste extra money on it now rather than wait for the AMD card to come out. And of course, they have said, DICE have said, that they have optimized the game more for AMD than they have for Nvidia. So it's going to be really interesting to see what AMD bring to the table. And it's coming this October, guys. At least that's what people are saying. Now here's another very interesting benchmark. This is showing the video memory usage with various resolutions and various settings. And they're comparing the GTX 780 and the Radeon 7970, which both of these cards have 3 gigs of vRAM, and some of the most popular cards that people have been upgrading to, like people have been thinking, oh, I'm going to need 3 gigs of vRAM for Battlefield 4. But if we skip past the sort of higher resolution there at the top, obviously as I mentioned before, anything above 1920 by 1080, you're probably going to need a little bit more vRAM for those resolutions, or if you're running sort of more than 2 monitors, maybe 3 monitors at a time. But if you look at the 1920 by 1080 MSAA 4 times, so everything is maxed out in Ultra, the 780 is only using around almost 2.3 gig of its VRAM, and the Radeon HD 7970 even less than that. And bear in mind that this isn't fully optimized yet, so looking at those numbers, I think it's probably safe to say that in the official game, those cards will probably be using less than 2 gig of VRAM. And then if you look down at the bottom there in 1920 by 1080 with MSAA 4 times turned off, the Radeon card there is using less than 2 gig already, and the GTX 780 is almost falling under the 2 gig there. So don't be rushing out there to buy a graphics card with thinking, oh right, I'm gonna need this 3 gig of VRAM because the recommended settings told me so. From these benchmarks, it's looking to be, in fact, that having that 3rd gig of VRAM isn't really going to benefit you all that much at all. So here we've got one last interesting slide to look at, and that is the load levels for the CPUs when linked up with the GTX Titan. And the reason they're using the Titan is so that the graphics card can in no way be bottlenecking the CPU. And this is at 1920 by 1080p, so you can see that the i7 2600K there, which is sort of, you know, I would say it's sort of a mid-level processor really. It's only using about 50 to 70% of its power really. And once again, this is not fully optimized. So if you have an i7, or I would say even an i5 processor, you should be pretty much good to go with Battlefield 4. And for those of you out there who use AMD processors, here we have the Vizera series, the FX 8350, as well as the 6300, and both of these processors seem to be coping pretty well with Battlefield 4, despite the fact that this is also in alpha testing, and these numbers are very poorly optimized. So I hope this has given you guys a little bit of food for thought when it comes to upgrading your rig for Battlefield 4, or whether you need to upgrade it at all. And like I said before, I would really urge to wait for October and to see what AMD brings out, because they might just surprise us all, especially since their stuff is going to be optimized for Battlefield 4. So whether you're somebody who for money is no object, or you're somebody who's looking to save the most amount of money but play Battlefield 4 at high or ultra settings, wait for October, guys. And I would like to urge just one more time that these numbers are not reflective of the final game. Don't take this as solid gold proof of how your hardware is going to perform in Battlefield 4. This is just supposed to be a little indication and something that may sort of help to sway your mind in deciding what hardware to upgrade to. So how about you guys? Are you guys ready for Battlefield 4, or do you need an upgrade? And if so, what card are you thinking about getting? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.